So, the explosive headline dominating news cycles is that King Charles just surprisingly granted Princess Anne the title of Royal Regent, or, at the very least, that is exactly how this complex constitutional maneuver is being frantically framed by the media. However, the meticulous way this entire situation was actually handled behind closed doors is infinitely stranger, more calculated, and significantly more revealing than anyone is truly discussing right now. The palace PR machinery has essentially successfully repositioned Anne as the unshakable emergency backbone of the entire monarchy through a highly specific surgical legal change that occurred very quietly back in late 2022. Yet, the stark practical reality of what that specific legal adjustment actually means for the survival of the crown is only truly becoming painfully clear to the public now, brought sharply into focus because of the king's ongoing, severe health struggles. And when you sit down and actively analyze exactly what the palace officially said versus exactly what actually happened structurally, the official timeline absolutely does not add up in the dramatic way the screaming headlines suggest. This was absolutely not some sudden, panicked, dramatic announcement made in the dead of night. It was an incredibly dry, highly obscure legislative tweak buried in parliamentary procedure that almost everyone completely ignored, until suddenly, unavoidably, it morphed into arguably the most critical, consequential decision of Charles's entire reign. Before we dive deep into the granular details of this constitutional sleight of hand, if you genuinely appreciate deep, analytical dives into the hidden mechanics of royal history like this, please hit subscribe to my channel. It truly supports the channel, and we consistently strive to break down these complex stories with context long before they blow up in the tabloids. The exact detail that makes this entire situation so incredibly fascinating is that the mainstream press coverage relentlessly keeps referring to this as a shocking or surprising recent decision. But the actual, binding legal groundwork for this exact scenario has been sitting plainly on the public record for years. Under the specific provisions of the Councillors of State Act 2022, King Charles officially, quietly requested that Parliament add Princess Anne and Prince Edward directly to the highly exclusive list of senior individuals who can legally, constitutionally, act on his behalf when he is physically unwell or traveling out of the country. On paper, to the average observer, that maneuver looks exactly like boring, standard administrative housekeeping. You see a dry headline about councillors of state, and you immediately scroll right past it because it sounds like tedious, archaic parliamentary paperwork. But when you actively dig into the constitutional bedrock of what that designation actually means in practice, it is absolutely anything but a routine update. Councillors of state are the highly specific, legally empowered individuals who can literally stand in for the reigning monarch during periods of absolute unavailability, whether that absence is due to a scheduled state visit abroad or a sudden, severe medical procedure that unexpectedly knocks him out of commission for a few critical days. The original Regency Act of 1937 explicitly mandated that the monarch's spouse and the first four adults firmly in the direct line of succession could automatically be called upon to serve in this capacity. Therefore, immediately after King Charles officially ascended to the throne, that specific automatic legal list technically included Queen Camilla, Prince William, Prince Harry, Prince Andrew, and Princess Beatrice. Crucially, two of those named individuals, Harry and Andrew, are absolutely no longer functioning as working royals, and one of them, Prince Andrew, represents a massive, toxic, ongoing constitutional and public relations nightmare that the palace absolutely, desperately did not want to actively deal with during a crisis. Consequently, a highly specific bill was quietly, efficiently rushed through the halls of Parliament specifically to fix what was rapidly becoming an incredibly awkward, potentially disastrous legal vulnerability for the Crown. But here is exactly where the narrative gets incredibly strange and revealing. King Charles absolutely did not just simply ask Parliament to temporarily swap out the problematic names. He deliberately added an unprecedented, ironclad stipulation dictating that Princess Anne and Prince Edward would officially serve as councillors of state for the absolute rest of their natural lives. That is a permanent, lifetime appointment written directly into law. Unlike Harry, Andrew, and Beatrice, whose eligibility will gradually and naturally be replaced or diluted as the line of succession inevitably shifts with new royal births, Anne and Edward are now permanently, legally locked into that elite pool of power. That is absolutely not a quick, temporary fix to a PR problem. That is the reigning king aggressively utilizing the full weight of national legislation to publicly, permanently signal to the establishment exactly who he actually, genuinely trusts to operate the delicate machinery of the crown when he cannot. So, in actual daily practice, the formal, legal pool of 7 potential counselors gets ruthlessly narrowed down to the absolute 4 people who would actually, realistically, be called upon in an emergency: Queen Camilla, Prince William, Princess Anne, and Prince Edward. Camilla is the devoted spouse, William is the direct heir, but Anne is the one who uniquely stands out in this group because she possesses absolutely zero personal, vested stake in the throne itself. She is absolutely never going to be the reigning queen. She is not married to the king. She is not actively raising a future monarch. She is simply the one person who has spent 5 grueling decades flawlessly proving that she will absolutely always show up, execute the difficult work without complaint, and absolutely never make the event about her own ego or personal brand. That is precisely the kind of fiercely reliable person you desperately want functioning as your ultimate constitutional backstop. And the king clearly, intimately knew it when he drafted the legislation. Now, to fully understand exactly why this specific elevation matters so profoundly, you absolutely have to understand exactly what the famous red box actually is. To an outsider, it merely looks like a quaint piece of battered burgundy leather luggage, but inside the highly complex British political system, it represents the absolute nerve center of raw state power. Every single day, senior civil servants, top intelligence officials, and high-ranking government ministers meticulously prepare highly classified briefs, sensitive intelligence summaries, pending legislative orders, and crucial state papers that strictly require the monarch's personal review and signature. Those vital documents go directly into a locked red dispatch box and are securely sent to the king for his daily review. Even when the king is traveling abroad or actively dealing with severe health issues, the relentless flow of those heavy boxes absolutely does not stop. The massive apparatus of the government must keep moving. Counselors of state are legally authorized to handle highly specific, vital constitutional functions on his behalf, and those critical functions explicitly include officially attending Privy Council meetings, legally signing routine but necessary state documents, and formally receiving the diplomatic credentials of new incoming ambassadors. Princess Anne now possesses the absolute, unquestionable legal authority to execute all of that business. In incredibly plain terms, when the king is physically or mentally unavailable, she can actively participate in high-level constitutional matters and personally sign the vital documents that literally keep the British state functioning legally. She can preside over Privy Council sessions, she can formally receive international ambassadors, she can essentially legally govern the country in his name. That is absolutely not a mere ceremonial role. That is absolutely not a fluffy symbolic title designed for good PR. That is raw, real executive royal function, the actual legal capacity to act with the authority of the sovereign when the king cannot. And given the grim reality that King Charles is currently fiercely battling cancer and carefully managing a highly demanding, exhausting treatment schedule, this immense power is absolutely not theoretical. It is highly operational right now. It is important to note that there are indeed some absolute core constitutional functions that counselors of state are strictly forbidden from performing. Those supreme powers remain exclusively, legally tied to the sovereign himself. These include his specific role as the ultimate monarch of the other independent Commonwealth realms, the immense unilateral power to officially dissolve Parliament, except upon his very explicit written instruction, the formal creation of new aristocratic peers, and the official hiring and appointing of a prime minister. However, aside from those very specific rare duties, the vast majority of the day-to-day workings of a modern constitutional monarchy can now be completely, effectively managed by Princess Anne. That represents an extraordinary, staggering amount of real-world, executive power legally entrusted to a woman who has quietly spent 50 years demonstrating unequivocally that she can flawlessly handle it without ego. And the precise timing of this massive elevation is absolutely not a random coincidence. It is direct cause and effect. Behind the heavy wrought iron palace gates, King Charles has been privately fighting a terrifying medical battle that has fundamentally, irrevocably altered exactly how the monarchy has to function moving forward into the future. On March 27th, Buckingham Palace officially announced to a stunned public that King Charles had experienced a severe adverse reaction to his routine cancer treatment and had spent necessary time in the hospital under observation. The carefully worded palace statement noted that, following scheduled and ongoing medical treatment for cancer, the king experienced temporary side effects that required a short period of observation in hospital. That was absolutely not an isolated, singular incident. Since his shocking cancer diagnosis was first revealed to the world in February 2024, the king has stubbornly continued his grueling treatment regimen while simultaneously maintaining an incredibly impressive, demanding pace of public duties. In 2025 alone, he remarkably conducted 535 official engagements, the absolute highest number he had completed since 2019, all while quietly undergoing weekly, draining cancer treatments. But the harsh, unavoidable reality is that a reigning monarch actively receiving intense cancer treatment is fundamentally someone who could be suddenly, temporarily incapacitated at absolutely any moment without warning. And when that inevitable moment happens, the massive, complex machinery of the British state absolutely cannot just grind to a halt and wait. The king will stubbornly continue to fulfill his absolutely essential constitutional functions for as long as possible, such as granting royal assent to new laws, officially appointing government ministers and senior officials, and holding his crucial weekly private audience with the Prime Minister. However, his forced, increasing absence from grueling public appearances has already necessitated other senior royals to aggressively step up to fill the massive void, prominently including Princess Anne, Queen Camilla, Prince William, Prince Edward, and Sophie. The highly respected UCL Constitution Unit, which serves as one of the absolute leading authoritative sources on complex British constitutional law, has been observing this unprecedented situation incredibly closely. Their detailed analysis, authored by the esteemed Professor Robert Hazel, strongly suggests the highly likely possibility of a soft regency occurring, a scenario where certain absolute core functions strictly remain with the ailing sovereign, while absolutely many other vital responsibilities are quietly, efficiently delegated out to trusted members of the royal family, particularly to Prince William. However, William is the direct future king, and he is currently being incredibly carefully, deliberately prepared for the massive weight of his own impending reign. That is exactly where the formidable Princess Anne becomes utterly indispensable. She is completely battle-hardened by decades of service, fully constitutionally empowered by the new law, and possesses absolutely zero personal disruptive ambitions for the throne itself. The immense health pressures bearing down on King Charles have made her sudden elevation absolutely not just reasonable, but incredibly urgent for the survival of the institution. When the king was unexpectedly hospitalized in March 2025, Princess Anne dutifully visited him at Clarence House on March 28th. Reliable reports indicate that immediately after seeing her sick brother, she stoically led a massive, formal investiture ceremony at Buckingham Palace, entirely without taking a single day off to process the emotion. She walked completely straight from her brother's tense sick room directly back into her grueling official duties without missing a single beat. That is the exact kind of fierce, unwavering reliability that absolutely cannot be artificially manufactured by public relations teams. Now, the prestigious title of Princess Royal itself possesses a rich, complex history that stretches back for centuries, and it is absolutely not just an empty, honorary fluff title. The reigning monarch officially grants it exclusively to the eldest daughter of the sovereign, but it is absolutely not an automatic right of birth. It has to be deliberately, formally assigned by the king, and once granted, it is securely held for life. Princess Anne, born on August 15, 1950, is the second child and only daughter of the late Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip. She tirelessly supports over 300 different charities and has served as the highly active president of Save the Children UK since 1970. The late Queen formally granted Anne the esteemed title of Princess Royal back in 1987, a highly exclusive title previously held by only 6 other women in the entire long history of Britain. That specific weighty title places her in a highly unique, special position entirely separate from the messy, cutthroat politics of the line of succession, and is explicitly marked by the monarch's absolute highest level of personal trust. Anne also simultaneously holds the vital title of Counselor of State, which, thanks to the 2022 legislation, is now a permanent lifetime role directly tied to her position as a working royal. So, as the Princess Royal, she uniquely possesses both an incredibly prestigious honorary title and the highly practical executive constitutional responsibilities incredibly similar to those of an actual regent in waiting. That specific, powerful combination of titles and legal authority has absolutely never existed in this exact, concentrated way before in modern history. Only the king himself, the Prince of Wales, and the Princess Royal are legally permitted to host a formal investiture ceremony, which usually takes place in the grand halls of Buckingham Palace or Windsor Castle. Princess Anne is exclusively one of those 3 powerful people. She incredibly often steps in seamlessly to host major events, as King Charles desperately attempts to manage his fragile health and exhausting schedule. Many massive investitures currently happen at Windsor Castle due to ongoing extensive restoration work at Buckingham Palace, and Princess Anne regularly, flawlessly hosts them. She confidently presents national honors, warmly welcomes the distinguished recipients, and powerfully, physically represents the unbroken continuity of the crown itself. That is absolutely not just holding a fancy title. That is actively, visibly, exercising raw royal authority on behalf of the state. The absolute primary reason King Charles explicitly chose Princess Anne as his main, unshakable support pillar is her undeniable, unparalleled track record of service. She is unequivocally the hardest working royal in all of recent British history. In both the years 2023 and 2024, she was officially recognized as the absolute hardest working royal, completing an astonishing 433 and 457 official engagements, respectively. Year after grueling year, she completely outperformed the rest of the entire Windsor family, routinely attending several different events in a single day, traveling extensively internationally, and actively participating in charity events, military reviews, agricultural conferences, and major state occasions. Crucially, she executes all of this work entirely without complaint, absolutely without drawing unnecessary flashy attention to herself, and completely without a slick publicist managing her image or leaking to the press. By the end of 2023, she had attended a staggering 457 royal engagements, averaging roughly 8 major events each and every week. 8 events every single week, consistently, at an advanced age when most ordinary people are deeply thinking about retiring and slowing down. In 2025, King Charles finally, narrowly surpassed her impressive numbers, but he did it in a specific way that tells its own revealing story. He completed exactly 50 more official engagements than Princess Anne, who still attended an incredible 478 events that year. However, even though she actually worked physically more days than he did, she simply had slightly fewer scheduled engagements on each of those days, while the king desperately packed his calendar much more tightly to project strength. Despite that minor statistical difference, she still managed to execute 478 appearances in a single year. And here is the part that truly, remarkably stands out about her character. Even after narrowly losing the media title of busiest royal to her brother, she absolutely did not slow down to rest. She actually sped up. Her 2025 total represented a massive 10% rise from her 2024 total of 457 engagements. Royal biographer Dickie Arbiter described her work ethic perfectly. She just gets on with it, often carrying out multiple exhausting engagements in a single day without a fuss. In 2026, she stubbornly continued to work incredibly hard. She flawlessly hosted the very first investiture ceremony of the year at Windsor Castle in January. She made a rare, passionate public statement about her vital work with the Carers Trust, an essential charity supporting unpaid caregivers, where she actively serves as both president and patron. Incredibly, immediately after attending her son Peter Phillips's wedding, she aggressively returned to her royal work within exactly 72 hours. The palace officially confirmed that she hosted a massive investiture ceremony just 3 days after the exhausting family wedding. That relentless, ironclad work ethic is exactly what makes her absolutely essential to the survival of the crown today. Now, let's zoom out significantly and critically look at the much bigger, institutional picture, because King Charles's calculated actions regarding Princess Anne are absolutely not just about managing today's frantic headlines. They represent a highly strategic foundational choice that will profoundly influence the stability of the monarchy for many years to come. Currently, we are thankfully far from actively needing to invoke the full, draconian measures of the Regency Acts, which would legally allow other senior royals to completely step in if the monarch absolutely cannot fulfill their basic duties. For temporary, manageable problems, 2 or more counselors of state simply take over for a short, defined time. For permanent, irreversible issues, a formal regent is officially appointed by Parliament. King Charles has been quietly, meticulously preparing the groundwork for both terrifying scenarios. He aggressively used the Councillors of State Act to brutally refresh the royal family's operational roles, firmly removing the disgraced Harry and Andrew from the active pool, while firmly, permanently placing the reliable Anne and Edward in their elevated positions. Despite actively undergoing exhausting cancer treatment, the king has stubbornly kept a very busy schedule of royal duties, personally completing nearly a quarter of absolutely all official events recorded in 2025, including extensive visits throughout Britain and demanding international trips to Italy, Canada, and Poland. By aggressively demonstrating his own physical strength, he has also cleverly made absolutely sure the monarchy is visibly supported by others, demonstrating it relies absolutely not just on him alone. Just 5 short years ago, there were a robust 15 working royals actively performing public duties for the crown. Since the tragic death of Queen Elizabeth, the explosive departure of Prince Harry and Meghan, the catastrophic public downfall of Prince Andrew, and Princess Alexandra's quiet retirement, that vital number has plummeted drastically to just 10. With the rapidly aging Dukes of Kent and Gloucester inevitably slowing down, we might very soon see that crucial number drop to a mere 7. 7 people will be forced to hold the entire, crushing weight of the British monarchy's global public image. Among those remaining 7, Princess Anne is now undeniably, legally the absolute most powerful non-heir in the entire institution. King Charles has privately, strategically conferred on her the functional, if not public, title of Princess Royal Regent, thereby massively strengthening the vulnerable monarchy during his illness. This calculated move loudly signals to the establishment that when he is inevitably gone and William finally takes the heavy throne, there will absolutely have been a steady, unshakable presence operating at the very heart of the monarchy, and that vital presence is unequivocally Anne. She has absolutely never sought fame, courted the press, or deliberately stirred up unnecessary controversy. Instead, she has been fiercely reliable, showing up regularly and flawlessly for decades. King Charles absolutely did not just give his sister a fancy new title. He deliberately created a strong, legally binding foundation for the survival of the crown, with Anne firmly positioned at its core. So, that is exactly where the narrative gets incredibly weird and revealing. The palace absolutely does not always announce massive structural changes with loud fanfare or press releases. Sometimes, the absolute most crucial, permanent decisions happen incredibly quietly, buried deep in acts of parliament, while the media's attention is entirely focused elsewhere on trivial scandals. The current public narrative being spun is that this was a sudden, stunning, reactive decision to his illness, but the actual binding legal framework empowering her has been fully in place since December 2022. The real, underlying story is absolutely not that King Charles suddenly, in a panic, decided to trust his sister. The real story is that he quietly, brilliantly built a massive constitutional safety net years ago when he took the throne, and now that his failing health has made that hidden safety net absolutely necessary to deploy, everyone is finally noticing the genius of the architecture. The question was absolutely never whether Princess Anne deserved this immense role or power. The real question is exactly why it took the rest of the world so incredibly long to recognize exactly what King Charles already intimately understood. But there is another deeply fascinating layer to this situation that almost nobody is discussing, and it has to do fundamentally with the massive difference between possessing formal, legal authority and wielding actual, practical influence. Because when you closely observe the way Princess Anne actually operates in the real world, she has absolutely never needed a formal legal title to command absolute respect from a room. She walks into a crowded room, and the entire power dynamic instantly, palpably shifts towards her. She absolutely does not do pointless small talk. She absolutely does not perform fake warmth for the flashing cameras. She is incredibly direct, brutally efficient, and famously, intimidatingly intolerant of absolutely anything or anyone that wastes her valuable time. That fierce reputation is absolutely not a liability for her. It is the exact reason she has slowly become the absolute most trusted, revered figure in the entire institution. The British public has watched her work tirelessly for decades, and they have clearly seen someone who treats her royal duty as an actual demanding job, absolutely not as a glamorous lifestyle. That relentless consistency over 50 years creates a specific kind of unassailable moral authority that absolutely cannot be legislated into existence by any parliament. You can easily pass a law that dictates someone is officially a counselor of state, but you absolutely cannot pass a law that forces the British people to genuinely trust them with the country. That deep trust had to be painstakingly earned. Grueling engagement by grueling engagement, year after exhausting year, in absolutely every overlooked corner of the country, very often with absolutely no cameras present to record the effort. And that is precisely why the quiet, obscure legal change back in 2022 mattered so incredibly much. It perfectly aligned the formal, rigid constitutional machinery of the state with the informal, practical reality that had already existed for a very long time. Absolutely everyone operating inside the royal system already deeply knew that Anne was the exact person you called when a massive problem needed to be handled efficiently, ruthlessly, and entirely without drama. The new legislation simply, officially made that unspoken understanding legally binding. Consider the immense, impressive range of her hundreds of patronages. She is absolutely not just showing up for easy photo ops and quick ribbon cuttings. She is deeply, actively involved in organizations that deal with incredibly complex, deeply unglamorous, difficult problems. She has been the highly active president of Save the Children UK for over 5 decades, bravely visiting dangerous war zones and squalid refugee camps, aggressively asking hard, uncomfortable questions of officials about logistics and funding shortfalls. She has been deeply involved with the Carers Trust, passionately advocating for people who provide exhausting, unpaid care to sick family members, a marginalized group that is almost entirely invisible in mainstream public policy debates. She has staunchly supported essential military organizations, vital agricultural societies, complex engineering institutions, and crucial maritime charities. That immense breadth of focus is highly unusual for a modern royal. Most royals specialize in a few key areas. Anne incredibly does everything, and she executes it with a level of deep technical knowledge that frequently shocks experts who fully expect to meet a smiling, uninformed figurehead. She actually reads the dense briefing documents. She accurately remembers tiny details from previous visits years prior. That is absolutely not the behavior of someone who merely views their role as an annoying obligation to endure. It is the undeniable behavior of someone who has intentionally built a lifelong career out of service and takes fierce pride in doing it exceptionally well. And that brings us directly to the incredibly uncomfortable, terrifying question that the palace PR team will absolutely never answer directly or honestly. What actually happens if King Charles becomes completely unable to perform even the absolute core essential functions that remain exclusively his? The current Counselors of State Act only safely covers temporary absences and short-term manageable incapacity, but it absolutely does not legally address a permanent, irreversible mental or physical decline. For that catastrophic scenario, you absolutely need to invoke a full, formal regency under the strict rules of the Regency Act of 1937, which would legally require Prince William to formally step in and rule as Prince Regent. That is a vastly much bigger, infinitely more disruptive constitutional event, and it would necessarily involve aggressive debates in Parliament, consultations with all the Commonwealth realms, and a level of intense, brutal public scrutiny that the terrified palace desperately wants to avoid at all costs. But the brilliant existence of Princess Anne as a permanent, lifetime counselor of state masterfully creates a massive legal buffer. It essentially means that even in a dark scenario where the king is seriously, permanently ill, the essential day-to-day functions of the monarchy can seamlessly continue operating without ever formally triggering a messy public regency. That is exactly the soft regency scenario that top constitutional experts have been quietly discussing in academic circles. The king formally remains king on paper. The absolute essential functions technically stay with him for as long as he can physically sign his name. Absolutely everything else gets quietly, efficiently distributed among the counselors, with Anne undeniably taking on a massively disproportionate share of the burden because she is by far the most experienced, the most respected, and the most fiercely reliable. It is a highly calculated way of managing a tragic decline without ever officially declaring it to the world. It is a brilliant way of keeping the fragile institution completely stable while completely avoiding the massive trauma of an official, premature transition of power. And it is absolutely only possible because Anne willingly accepted a lifetime appointment. She could easily have said no. She could have comfortably stayed in her existing busy role without voluntarily taking on massive additional constitutional responsibilities, but she didn't. She bravely said yes, incredibly quietly, entirely without fanfare or demands for recognition, because that is exactly what she has absolutely always done for her family and her country. The other fascinating thing highly worth noting is that this specific, unprecedented arrangement fundamentally changes the complex internal dynamics of the royal family in subtle ways that will dramatically play out over the next crucial decade. Prince William is the undeniable heir, and he absolutely will be king. That is absolutely not in question. But William is also still a relatively young man managing a young family, and he is still actively finding his ultimate footing and defining his style as the Prince of Wales. He has bravely taken on significantly more responsibilities in recent years, but he absolutely does not currently have the exact same profound depth of institutional experience that Anne has painstakingly accumulated over 50 years of unbroken service. That is absolutely not a criticism of him. It is just an undeniable historical fact. Absolutely no one can magically fast forward through 5 decades of grueling service. So, there is a natural, unavoidable tension currently existing between the future of the crown and the immediate needs of the present. The future absolutely belongs to William, but the fragile present desperately requires Anne. She is absolutely not competing with him for power or popularity. She is fiercely supporting him, whether he fully realizes the extent of it or not. Every single investiture she flawlessly hosts, every single ambassador she formally receives, every single state document she securely signs, she is actively holding the institutional line so that when William eventually, inevitably takes the heavy throne, he miraculously inherits an institution that is still smoothly functioning, still globally respected, and still highly relevant. That is an invaluable gift that absolutely cannot be quantified or measured in mere engagement counts or tabloid headlines. It is the quiet, essential work of deep institutional preservation, and it is exactly the specific kind of unglamorous work that Anne has spent her entire dedicated life doing in the shadows. There is also a profound, undeniable historical echo here that deeply deserves attention. Princess Anne is absolutely not the first royal woman to serve as a vital, stabilizing force during a terrifying period of constitutional uncertainty. The British monarchy possesses a very long, storied tradition of heavily relying on senior, steadfast female family members to successfully bridge the dangerous gaps between reigns. Queen Mary was an absolute, towering, terrifyingly strong figure during the chaotic abdication crisis and deeply stabilized the early, uncertain years of King George VI's reign. Queen Elizabeth, the beloved Queen Mother, provided massive, necessary continuity and comfort to the nation after the tragic, early death of George VI. Princess Margaret, despite absolutely all of her highly publicized personal complications and scandals, was a constant, stabilizing presence during the incredibly difficult early years of Queen Elizabeth II's incredibly long reign. But Anne is fundamentally different from absolutely all of them because she has been explicitly, legally given formal, binding constitutional authority. She is absolutely not just a comforting, symbolic figure of continuity. She is a highly active, legal, constitutional actor wielding defined, executive powers over the state. That is entirely new. It has absolutely never happened before in quite this exact, legalized way in British history. A princess royal who is absolutely not in the direct line of succession, currently holding permanent, lifetime counselor of state status, effectively and legally functioning as a powerful regent in waiting, while the reigning king battles a terrifying cancer and the direct heir frantically prepares for his future role. That is completely unprecedented, and it happens so incredibly quietly that most of the general public still absolutely does not understand the magnitude of what it means. So when you see dramatic, breathless headlines screaming that King Charles just suddenly gave Princess Anne the royal regent title, you absolutely have to read them with a highly critical eye. The actual truth is infinitely more complicated and significantly more interesting than the clickbait. The title itself is not new. The legal authority granted to her is absolutely not new. What is entirely new is the sudden, widespread public recognition that this brilliant, fail-safe arrangement actually exists and that it matters enormously to the survival of the country. The brilliant palace legal team has been quietly preparing for this exact, terrifying moment for years, and they executed it in the absolute most British way possible, through a dry, highly obscure legislative amendment that absolutely nobody noticed at the time, followed by years of quiet, steady implementation behind the scenes, followed eventually by a slow, unavoidable drip of public appearances that gradually, smoothly made the new constitutional reality absolutely impossible to ignore. There was absolutely no flashy press conference, absolutely no grand, televised announcement, and absolutely no dramatic moment where the king stood on a balcony and tearfully declared to the masses that his sister would save the monarchy. There was just a boring bill quietly passed in Parliament, a quiet signature on a document, and a highly dedicated woman simply getting back to work. That is the true story. That is the actual historical reality. King Charles did absolutely not suddenly decide to trust Princess Anne in a moment of panic. He has absolutely always trusted her implicitly. The rest of the world is simply finally catching up to that fact, and maybe that is the absolute most remarkable thing about this entire unprecedented situation. In a modern era where absolutely every single royal action is intensely scrutinized, every brief statement is mercilessly parsed, and every outfit is endlessly analyzed for hidden meaning, Princess Anne has somehow miraculously managed to become the absolute most powerful non-heir in the entire ancient institution, completely without ever actively seeking the attention. She has absolutely no Instagram or social media presence. She gives incredibly few, highly guarded interviews. She absolutely does not cultivate a slick, marketable personal brand. She just shows up, does the grueling work flawlessly, and goes home. And after 50 long, unbroken years of doing exactly that, she has finally earned something that absolutely cannot be bought with PR money, inherited by blood, or legislated by politicians. She has earned absolute, unshakable trust. The king intimately knows it, the palace establishment knows it, Parliament knows it, and now, finally, the British public is starting to deeply know it too. The Royal Regent title, however it is dramatically framed by the media, is really just a formal legal recognition of exactly what has been fundamentally true for a very, very long time. Princess Anne is the absolute, unyielding backbone of the British monarchy, and she has quietly been exactly that for decades. The absolute only difference now is that the law finally recognizes it.